Welcome to the National Widowers Organization and our brother site, the Men's Grief Network, monthly webinar, where we seek to provide grief support for those who've lost a spouse, partner, or any significant loved one. The NWO is a nonprofit group bringing men together in grief. Our organization is led by experts in loss, many of whom are widowers, and others who have grieved significant deaths. The NWO and Men's Grief Network offers free of charge resources, including articles, blogs, books, peer-to-peer support, and more to help men during this very difficult time and beyond. As men, we don't have to go through loss alone, whether it be the loss of a spouse, child, parent, friend, or sibling. I'm NWO board member Ken Levy. I lost Sheila, my wife of 18 years, to inflammatory breast cancer when she was just 49. Tonight, we're coming together to mark National Men in Grief Day. Tonight's program provides insights from myself and two fellow board members, Joe Walko and Kei Okada. We'll take a closer look at the manifestations of grief from both Joe and myself, with insights from Kei, a bereavement counselor and bereavement expert. Tonight's meeting will conclude with 15 minutes of questions and answers. And during the Q&A, we certainly encourage you, as we do every month, to post questions or comments. Tonight's guests are Joe Walko. Joe is a father, author, and finance professional who chose to serve as a board member for the Men's Grief Network because he had to walk the path of intense grief after the death of his wife 10 years ago when she was only 45. He navigated the tricky path of single parenthood while balancing a career trying to help others through his work with local bereavement groups. Kei Okada. Kei was born in New York and raised in Japan. An initial plan to study for a year in the US extended to 3 art schools, followed by 4 years of working with postmodern dancers and dance theaters in New York City. His love of language led him to study biblical languages at the Union Theological Seminary, where the field education course led him to a meaningful vocation in chaplaincy through a clinical worker training of the CPE, which is the Clinical Pastoral Education. I'd like to hand this presentation at the moment right now to NWO board member Joe Walko. Joe?
Hey, thanks for that introduction, Ken, and welcome to everyone who's tuned in to the webinar. I'm going to, before we get into the main focus of the second, I'm going to get into a little bit about what the Men's Grief Network is, why we're doing this today, and what we hope to accomplish, and start sharing some resources that we have that might certainly benefit some of the folks that are on this call and attending the webinar. Just briefly, the Men's Grief Network is a group, an offshoot of the National Widowers Association, as Ken said, and we're here to connect men in grief, and to do so. We've got a very good website up here with some resources that we can go through to help you connect. I mean, as we said in our email blast today, men are expected to kind of go through grief with the strong bravado and not show the emotion and things like that. That's kind of been the classic way that we've been portrayed in movies and popular culture, but that's not how it is. Grief is an emotion we all go through, and while it's universal, the experience is totally individual, as you'll hear from myself and from Kei and from Ken. And there are distinct differences in the way that men grieve versus women versus other groups, and we do have experts on hand to walk us through that and try to start understanding how to deal with that. We were founded to connect men in grief and give information and resources and support those who educate. And that's still what we're trying to do. That's why I'm here. That's why Kei's here. That's why Ken is here. We've been this. We've walked this path, and we understand that void. We understand what happens, whether it be a spouse, a parent, a child, or a grandchild. So we're here to educate and provide resources to folks so that we can work through this, especially as men work through things that are oftentimes very personal. We're not usually I don't want to say allowed, but it's not oftentimes that men are allowed to really express some of the true feelings that grief brings out in you. It's truly a profound experience and a profound individual things. And boy, one of the things I most remember is just feeling so lost whenever I lost my wife, and where do I turn? Is this normal what I'm feeling? All the things that were still expected of me in my prior roles, in addition to all the new roles that were added to me by the death of my wife, and I'll get into that later. But our vision at the Men's Grief Network and the National Widowers Organization is to make appropriate groups available nationwide, make resources available, and be a source that you can ask these questions and start exploring the very, very, very important aspects of exploring your grief. Some of the resources we offer are some blogs. That the spiritual aspect of our grief is a great blog that Kay puts out. I'm going to get into that in a little bit too. It is part of my talk. You can see these are snippets from our website. Some of the blogs that are out there right now are around spirituality and asking the questions. And certainly from my experience and from others, boy, if you're really going to be shaken to your core, grief is a great way to do that. And having spirituality or having your questions on your spirituality is certainly a common theme that we've seen. But then we also have blogs on coping steps to move towards happiness, dating issues. Grief is a process too. You're going to have to continue to roll through your life and build that back up, and try to decide how you're going to react to things as they're going now. And that's what we're attempting to do with our blog. That's what we're attempting to do with a lot of the resource that we have on there. Another great resource that I'm very excited about are these webinars. So appreciate everyone who is tuned in tonight. Again, this is a general webinar coinciding with Men in Grief Day, National Men in Grief Day, to introduce you to our organization, to introduce you to what we offer. But we do have a whole webinar series that we conduct once a month. And then even the ones that are from the past, they're on our website, so you can download those too. And again, that's oftentimes a great place to go and understand that that there are resources available there for you, and hopefully you can explore some of these things at your leisure and start getting into some of the things that we offer. But we're not just about resources too. I do believe these webinars allow us to reach out individually and connect on that human level. So with that said, I'm going to jump into a little bit of my story and share with everyone some of the things that I experienced in the 11 years. And now been 11 years since my wife passed away, and some of the things that I felt, because you don't forget those, and some of the things that helped me move through this. And so, as Ken said, I lost my wife, Debbie, in 2012 to breast cancer. She had battled for 4 years, but was told she had a very good prognosis, 92% cure rate. And the fact that we lost her 4 years later was, to say it was a shock, was certainly an understatement. And that to me is one of the bellwether items of grief, is just that profound, wow, what just happened? My life has now just turned around. It has, this wasn't in the plans. This is nothing that anyone ever can really react to until you feel it. And then you're not able to really process that feelings, because this isn't really something that we talk about a lot. It's not something that we even prepare for, even though my wife had cancer, and we all know that can be devastating. I still thought she would beat it. I thought she was young enough. I thought She was strong enough, and we prayed enough that that things were going to turn out good, and to have it um, go down so quickly at the end was nothing less than shocking. And that huge empty hole in my life, it was especially at night, that the other side of the bed was just like that was a black hole for a long time, and reaching out and feeling nothing. And boy, it just stuns you. It just really stuns you. And everyone's situation is different, but loss is a permanent in a way that we think we might understand, but you really don't until you feel that. And my wife was a stay-at-home mom, and she took care of all my two kids. They were 9 and 12 at the time um, that she passed. And in addition to um, grappling with her loss and my loss of a partner and my loss of our hopes and dreams of growing old, I also then had to start at some point thinking about rebuilding a life, and that included learning how to be Mr. Mom. And I'll be honest, I didn't do much up until that point. I brought home the paycheck. I showed up for the Little League games and it did all those things, but I didn't do the grocery shopping or the laundry. And there were some, I can look back and laugh now because we survived, but I didn't know they sold more than milk and diapers at the grocery. So wow, there's a whole bunch that goes into into feeding a family that my wife took care of. Um, so after after when there's first that loss, there's a lot of people around to help, and one by one and slowly those people they go back to their lives, and you're left with just a few core people to help you. The meals stop showing up at the doorstep, and the calls on how you're doing, they get fewer and fewer. And after a while, society expects, okay, well, it's been 3 months, it's been 6 months, you're through this, right? But certainly everyone in this call knows that's not what happens. That hole is with you forever, and you now have to make some choices. Are you going to ignore that? Are you going to try to get help for that? Are you going to work around it? And that's where the hard part really begins. The folks quit coming around. The boss doesn't seem to care anymore, and the deadlines that you had used to have a little leeway for, suddenly you don't. And now you got to start. I was faced with, now I've got to start taking care of myself. And what do? I didn't know anyone who had lost a spouse at my age, and so of course the first thing I did was look through the internet and start doing some research on there. And I did find some of the resources of the NWO and a lot of good things on there. And, just tried to hook up with some of the things that I found online. And I also got involved in a local bereavement group for young widow and widowers. Through the hospice organization that took care of my wife for the last 2 weeks. And those were really helpful. With the pandemic lately, a lot of bereavement groups went away, and the in-person counseling suddenly wasn't there. But we did fill that gap with things like we're doing tonight with a webinar. And this allows us to connect with folks around the country, which builds you a bigger pool of people, because depending on where you are, if you're in a part of the country that's relatively rural, there may not be a local bereavement group for you. And these Zoom sessions and these webinars is definitely a place to reach out and to share. But I was lucky enough to go to an in-person one also. And so that was good. The counselor who ran that, I would love to run into him at some point and offer a little bit more thanks than I wasn't capable of doing at that time. This guy even came out to the house and talked to my kids individually, and he told me that both my kids were at separate developmental ages on the grief scale, and I had to treat them differently, and that those were just wonderful, wonderful resources. So my point number one is resources are out there, and it's up to you to kind of go find them, or at least get pointed in that right direction. But once you do, I think you'll find that it's pretty easy to dig into what the good ones are for you. And again, that's the point of the Men's Grief Network and the National Widowers Organization, is to point you in that direction to get you going. But what really helped me, and as I look back now with the gift of 11 years since then, the thing that surprised and got me through it the most was something completely out of the blue, something I had never done before. And I go back to one of the things that grief does is it completely strips you down to the barest essential. And you no longer have the energy nor the desire to put on the roles and the airs and all the things that used to be so important in your life, because you're struggling just to get through day by day. And having that stripped down, well, I might as well try this attitude. It gives you an opportunity to do things that you may not have done in your former life, pre passing of your loved one. And for whatever reason, the loneliness is part and parcel to loss. But for whatever reason, I felt a desire to start writing. And I had never written before, and I had never, certainly had never written on an emotional topic or anything like that. But we live in the electronic age, and I wanted to share it too. So I started a blog. There was a free site I started on WordPress, and I just started putting things out there on what I felt. Especially as a man, especially as someone struggling to balance a career and keep my kids on track and do all these new roles I'm learning. And I just would start regurgitating this and throwing it out there. And the beauty of the World Wide Web is it's worldwide. And people from around the world started commenting, and you know what, there is one universal experience that we all share, and that's death and the grieving of those that we lose around us. The entire world goes through that, and it does not matter the language, the culture, the struggles are there. And so folks reached out and, just, hey, keep up the good work. Yeah, I feel that way too. Just little comments like that. And it really, really helped me. And I actually kept this up. I kept my blog up for probably that 2, maybe 3 years. And it was great to also then have people saying, hey, I'm feeling the same way. Can you help me? And then that got into a give back cycle. And suddenly I had some purpose other than, just getting through this. And again, it all stemmed from this brand new desire to start writing. And I didn't have that prior to my wife's dying. And I don't think it was the writing necessarily. I believe it was the sharing, and the sharing of the feelings and the experience. Because really, the only folks who can really understand what you're going through are others who are going through it themselves, or have gone through it themselves. And it took a lot of comfort, out of just, someone who had been through what I had been through, or at least had a very similar experience. They didn't offer the platitudes that we all hate. Oh, it all happens for a reason, and oh well, I'll look out I'll check in with you in 6 months, and you never hear from. They just listened, and that's what I wanted at the time the most. Hey, just hear me out. Read my words, and you don't have to agree with them, but perhaps you'll find part of yourself in there. And that's what people did. They reflected back to me the same things I was feeling, and in a weird way, there was a comfort in that. We're all going to go through grief at some time. Every one of us is probably going to lose someone that's going to knock you on your butt. And that is, I I thought I was a tough guy. I thought I could outwork anything. I thought that there was nothing in this world that I couldn't outwork or just take a fight to. But grief was that enemy that knocked me down, and it literally knocked me down and forced me to reinvent myself and so on and so forth. But that's not the point of this. The point of my 15 minutes here is that I found something that worked for me through a whole because I was looking, because I went looking for things. It found me, and I encourage everyone on this call to take that step, to have the courage to listen to that voice that is now there, because all your pretenses are gone. You're stripped down to the barest essential you're gonna be. Listen to what you need at that point, and then try to find the resources to satisfy what that voice is saying. And it's going to be different for everyone. I'm giving my one example. Others will give their examples. Your example is going to be yours. Just like grief is a personal process, so are the resources that you need to help get you through that. That's a very personal thing for you too. Our job is to facilitate that and get you thinking about things and get you going in terms of starting to face the issues that you're gonna have to face if you want to navigate this new path called grief. So that's briefly my story. I'm going to turn it over to Kay now. He has another interesting perspective. Ken has an interesting perspective, and then if we can hear from some folks at the end on questions they might have, that's kind of where we're going with this. So Kay, I've talked a little too long here, so let me turn it over to you, and appreciate everyone listening, and good luck on your grief journeys, and please let us know how we can reach out to you if you need that.
Ken, why don't you go next?
I can't say how much everything Joe said resonated with me. In fact, my wife also passed of breast cancer at 49 years of age. She was a marathon runner, so extremely healthy. She was a virtual vegetarian, an incredibly upbeat, optimistic person, and she was probably a poster child for not getting cancer. Didn't have a family history, always had immaculate health reports whenever she would go to the doctor. So the first time that we got that indication that, in fact, she tested positive for malignancy, it really was a body blow. And I think all of our brothers out there that might have experienced a similar diagnosis with their wives or spouses or significant others with relation to a potentially fatal disease like cancer is something that really focuses you like a laser beam, and it's first getting over the shock. So it really was even a bigger blow. Obviously, the biggest blow of all was losing my wife after she was also given a very good prognosis for beating this. As I think the statistic is 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer, and there's a very high survival rate, especially if it's at a stage 1 type of thing. So in my wife's case, it was stage 1. She did a year of the traditional standard of care, which I guess is colloquially referred to as cut, burn, and poison, which is where you cut out the tumor, you burn it with radiation, and you poison it with chemotherapy. So she got pretty beat up during that 1-year period of doing that. Went back to running and back to work, rebuilding her immune system and building back her strength. And she did it in an exemplary fashion, maintained her wonderful, crazy, wacky sense of humor. My wife is a bit of a combination of both. I always told her, you're a bit combination of Daffy Duck and Lucille Ball, if you can imagine. So she just had this very great, optimistic, crazy sense of humor. So when it came back, I'd say about 5 years after, it was a really big shock. And then she passed away within about 4 months after she was diagnosed with the recurrence. I suppose, as we were saying quite a bit here at the National Widowers and Men's Grief Network, men are expected to sort of behave. If the older listeners and viewers out there remember Gary Cooper, who's actually a little bit before my time too, but Gary Cooper embodied the sort of strong, silent type of movie hero in America, and you weren't supposed to show your emotions, and you weren't supposed to be, expressing grief or other sort of kindred type of things. But I mean, grief is something that not only our body reacts to, our mind reacts to, our emotions and our soul really reacts to this level of loss. And this is something that we can't ignore. There's no real one size fits all. I had my journey, Joe has yours, and everybody who's watching us tonight have their own journey and have to find what's best for them. And what's so strong and wonderful in terms of this resource of National Widowers Organization and Men's Grief Network is that we offer some tools to help you along this path, as Joe was saying, with peer-to-peer support and bereavement experts that we have as board members. I'm certainly not an expert in bereavement or grief. I'm someone who experienced loss as Joe did, but I take strength from not only dealing with people that have also experienced loss, but from our wonderful team of board members and people that are associated with our past monthly webinars that offer their insights into the grieving process. The other thing I think is important to keep in mind is that not only is not one size fit all, but grief is not a totally linear journey. So I would say to the men out there that are bereft, grieving, that if you slide back a bit or find yourself getting into a bad place mentally or whatever, you don't feel like getting out of bed or anything, don't beat yourself up over it. I mean, that's normal. That it's, again, not a progression that is predictable, that I'm getting better all the time, to quote the Beatles. Sometimes you backslide. Myself, I dealt with, when I lost Sheila, we didn't have kids. We were going to have kids. Then Sheila was diagnosed with cancer the first time. As I mentioned, she did the chemo, which threw her into premature chemically induced menopause. So that loss was even, arguably, I asked myself this question a lot: which is worse, that we didn't have kids or we did? Because I'd be a single dad. I didn't know how I would have coped with that. But to not have a legacy of a daughter or a son from my beloved wife is also got its own implications as well. My wife was from Colombia. So on the outset, there was also a cultural thing where my in-laws live in another continent. So it was very difficult. I went through some very difficult times with complicated grief, or actually it's not called complicated grief anymore. It's prolonged grief, I believe it's referred to clinically. So I had that sort of thing to shoulder, that burden. And I'm sure a lot of you out there might have also heard some pat things, as Joe referred to also, that you have to get over this within a certain period of time. Some people come up with not exactly the most sensitive things to say, in terms of like, you have to move on. That really hurt. I don't know how you guys feel about when somebody says you have to move on. You move on if you lose your house keys. You move on if you lose your job. There's no moving on from losing someone so dear and so close to you. You want to move forward. Might be a question of semantics, perhaps, but to me, the distinction is very real. So, sometimes people are trying to be helpful. I found that to be the case. And you find that sometimes they, if anything, piss you off because they're saying things that you don't really find that you connect with. But don't be put off with that. I think the thing to do is to follow your heart, follow the journey, and to immerse yourself when you can, when you're ready to, in things that give you peace, things that give you strength. Reignite your passions for the things that you shared with your spouse. Reignite the passions that you felt before you met your spouse, the things that you love, the things that give you joy. I know that's easier said than done. Sometimes it takes not much time to get re-engaged or re-energized in those pursuits that you had done. Sometimes it could take a while. I always had a great love of photography, and I reconnected with that part of that passion several years after I lost my wife, and I've kind of done some professional photography along the way, and I love it. It's one of the things that's really helped me. Music also helped me to reconnect. Music obviously is a vibration. It's an energy field, and you could either connect with whatever genre of energy field we also call music that you want to. For me, growing up when I did in the 60s, it was rock and roll. So I would blast Creedence Clearwater Revival, so that always does it for me. So it's energizing yourself when you're ready to, with those things that give you purpose and meaning, because really that's what life's about. I think one of the things that Joe said is one of the things that we all share is losing someone, everyone in the world. But I think one of the other essentials that give life purpose and meaning is love. And if we're lucky, we find that. Really lucky to keep it, unlucky to have lost it. You never really lose it. I will qualify that statement that we always hold it in our hearts, but the person is physically not there anymore. But do what you can to honor that person, to maintain their memory, to maintain their point and purpose in the world, and to maybe push forward the things that they believed in your own life, and through your own children, and through your job, and through just your attitude and how you deal with other humans. So it's an incredibly difficult journey. My heart goes out to everyone who's joined us tonight to try to work through this as best you can. And another thing I meant to bring up earlier was that initially with the men's aspect of this group, is that my bereavement groups that I went to initially were 99% women. So there was that perspective that was really kind of missing. I gained a lot of benefit from the group. It was led by a wonderful facilitator, and I benefited from being there, but I also felt kind of out of place. And I think there was one other guy there in an audience or a group of I'd say about 24 women. So the other guy kind of dropped out after like 2 or 3 sessions. Then I became the only guy. So I think this is a place that we feel that we can be more ourselves, and no knock against bereavement groups that are predominantly women, because we know that women typically tend to form tighter social networks and social groups, and men tend to revolve more around activities. I hope I'm not saying anything horribly politically correct these days. But so I would encourage you to also seek out resources in your local area as far as, bereavement groups and peer-to-peer counseling and things like that. So how are we doing for time? Again, I know that we're always watching the clock here. I thank you for tuning in tonight. I'm going to hand it over to Kay. And again, thanks for being here, and over to you, Kay.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Joe. So I have a screen to share. So my personal losses are not my spouse, but starting with my mother, father, grandparents. Each loss is different. And as Ken said, we keep exploring ways to honor the person we are missing. And surely the most important thing, our love to keep. And so my approach is from a spiritual care standpoint. We all have different way of interpreting what's happening. So I just brainstormed what can be different ways of describing grief. So I offer you just as reflection points, perspectives of grief first. Grief as a companion to get befriended with. And as both of you said, not a problem to solve or control, but then this is, we are going to live with grief. So grief, how can we see grief like a companion to get befriended with? But then it's sometimes painful. Then the pain aspect, can we have a way to see sometimes grief as a labor pain of seasonal shift, because we have lived that kind of season for some time, and then part of us is still living there. And then when the season of relationships change, and then season change, and then we don't have to move on in one way, but then in another way, we may keep losing, we may keep missing the lost roles, but then we may keep finding new roles. So this shift may come as a pain. If we see it as a labor pain, perhaps we explore resources, how we can explore ways to birth any newness of living with this experience. And grief as your relationship with loved ones to nurture. The physical presence dies. We all have limit to our physical presence, but then relationship continues. The question is, how can we nurture a relationship with the person we love? So grief as your way of loving, partnership continues. And grief as a channel of story growing with others, this is more like a communal perspective. If the person you are missing, you are grieving the loss. If other family members or friends who knew the person sharing the stories continue to grow. And then you keep hearing new aspects of stories from other people as well. And then what you share, your story, may inspire in surprising diverse ways in other people's lives. And that's part of the way how we can honor the person we are missing. Grief as a growing wisdom of how to live with the grief of others. So this is why communities of grievers is very important. We share our experiences to inspire each other. And it's part of our growth process. Also, images, I would like to suggest this approach also. Finding images in nature of grief journey. This is a journey, this is a passage. What is it like? How has your journey of grief been like? How is your loved one's presence along the way? And if you reflect on your journey with grief, where your heart is desiring, heading for where with your loved one. And as you continue to live with grief, this journey, is it like swimming in the ocean? I remember this person who was really struggling to imagine the life without his loved one. Before the loved one's death, he was really struggling with the image. And so it sounded like he was struggling with something he couldn't imagine, total unknown. So I took a cue from his expression and then asked him, suppose you are someone who spent the whole life in the mountains, that's someone who has never seen the ocean. And then now, for the first time in your life, you are standing on the beach, looking at the ocean. You have no idea what this is. And then you start checking what it is, this ocean, which looks totally different from where you used to live. And then you tip your toe, and then you check the water, and the waves, and you feel the waves, and you start to get into the water. He took this metaphor, and the following week, when I asked him how he was doing, he remarkably said the water was knee deep, he said. And then next time I saw him, still his loved one was living in the dying process. And then next time he said the water is chest deep. And then after his partner peacefully died, and then after the death, I called him and then offered him condolences. And his answer was, he's now trying to learn how to swim. And then so I offered him, we have bereavement counselors. And as you learn how to swim, they may become like a float until you independently learn how to swim. And that's just one image of nature. How do you describe your grief experience? In the pandemic also, our collective grief experience of having lost what it used to be or how our life used to be. And Japanese tradition of gold bonding pop up in different lectures and workshops. The idea is when the vessel is broken, it's not finished. But then the idea is you apply gold to make it into new shape. Our question, when you lose someone so dearly, you loved, and then so part of you has been lost, and then you feel broken inside. How is it like to make your life into something new? And when the music you enjoyed for a long time, the concert is over. And when the music is over, the music, your loved one, is not over. Music stays inside of you. Now, how do you pick up the pieces of those music experience in your heart? Do you start a new music? Or you make the music into the form of vinyl record or play it again and again? And then this planet is also showing different aspect, different color, different shape. So is our life. Our life shows different views, different scenery. How can we meditate on these planetary changes? Oh, I'm sorry. It's automatic music. And you are going through the water and on the boat. And then you feel the waves of grief. And how do you navigate through these waves? We have 911 memorial. And then we use the water and waterfall. Water carries our emotion. And when the trees shed leaves, these leaves are they dead? They become nourishment to the soil. Along the way, we see new life. What can be new in our life? And what can be peace we can imagine? Thank you. This much is my thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to open it up for question and answer. Please feel free to post any question or anecdote or comment. I would like to ask both Joe and Kay, how could we support a grieving man that we know?
So
Yeah, start.
I'll go first, Ken. I'm going to first comment on Kay's presentation. And I get a lot of what you put in there, but I wouldn't have got that going through the early stages of it. So I certainly appreciate that holistic view, Kay. And yeah, that what you were saying is that there was a lot of good resources there, but there's a lot to process there too. And I get it. This is an introductory session, things like that. So to the participants who maybe felt that didn't apply to you or things like that, there was a lot to unpack there. And that was really a master class in so many things that you'll be experiencing. And there's no hurry to understand that.
That's right.
As
That's
we've
right.
been talking. It's one step at a time. It's
That's
one
right.
day at a time. Some days it's some days it's 1 minute at a time. Another comment from Ken's talk about grief not being linear. I felt it was more like the Wheel of Fortune wheel, and some days people were tugging on that thing and it was spinning really fast and you didn't know where it was going to land, whether that was going to be anger or sadness or confusion. And some days it was pretty stable and not moving that fast. And then some days you hit every one of those emotions within a 5-minute period. And the linear aspect of it is certainly not something that just because you feel something one day that you didn't feel before does not mean you're doing it wrong or things like that. It's much more of a bouncing back and forth between all these things. So I just wanted to get those comments in, Ken, but before you asked us about resources, and I'm going to bolster again some of what Kay was saying. I suddenly found myself spending a lot of time in nature and deeply appreciating it, seeing things I never noticed before because I was too busy, and little things of beauty that you find, and you're going to start finding signs of your loved one. That's a cardinal here or a butterfly there, something like a song comes on the radio that reminds you, and you're more in tune with that. You're much more in tune with that, and nature certainly was another healing balm that I used to get that, and mostly because when you're in nature, death is all around you. You might be in a forest, but there are dead logs on the forest floor that are nurturing the new life, as Kate said, and you see it. You see the whole circle of life out in a forest or in a field or things like that, and that brought me a lot of comfort. That someday we'll all be back together again and nurturing the next generation and things like that. So that's my answer, Ken, to your question. Kay, I'll let you add more.
Yeah, I just responded to one person's question about what did you do when your loved one, just your wife, died immediately after death? And my answer was, you allow yourself plenty of time and space to really be in the moment with gentleness. And also, I added the person you miss, your loved one's good wishes for you, embracing you. Yeah.
Thanks,
But
guys.
I appreciate your comment, Joe. Yeah, it's a journey, and there is no set formula or format. Yeah, it's going to be your experience, but I think I want to emphasize on your connection with your loved one, how your loved one would wish you to be if the person knows how much grief you had, but then you are still alive here physically, and then the other side is a mystery, but then how would she want to see you in the state? And I'm sure, yeah, in your love, she or he would love to comfort you, and so we have to receive it too.
We have a question from Robert, who writes, anything special about dealing with people you haven't seen for years because of the pandemic? And they ask how your wife is.
I mean, you got to be honest, right?
Yeah.
And grief is really honest. Death is really honest. It comes for everyone, right? And there's no tiptoeing around that. You just face it head on.
I'd like to, I guess we're running a little bit short of time here, but I'll just close with one last question, which is why National Men in Grief Day? Maybe a quick answer from both of you guys. So today is May 30th. This was something that we instituted starting from this day forward. Every year, May 30th will be a National Men in Grief Day. So just your take on that?
Joe?
I guess it's about raising awareness, right? And it seems like there's a national day for everything, and some may not mean something to you, but some do. When you're in grief, it's just nice to know there are others that are going through that with you. And so let's widen that circle, and let's let other people know that, hey, you might be having a really good day, but someone who's going through grief might not be. So if you have that awareness and that ability to create that safe space to allow people to go through what they need to process grief, that's what we're going for, widening that circle and getting that understanding. And certainly from my experience, I had people at a certain period of time, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, say, well, aren't you through that yet? How come you're not performing as well at work as you used to, and things like that? And I just wanted to look at them and say, well, you don't get it. And that's what we're trying to do, is raise that awareness so that there's a little more understanding, especially I liked to keep everything. I was much more comfortable writing about things than I was talking about. It took me a long time to learn to talk about things. And every participant on this call is going to have to figure out what tools they need to help them. It's going to be different for them. And if we can create that safe space by having a national day of recognition of that helps you expand and get to that point, then we've done our job. And again, there's another one coming up in September around widowers and things, and loss of spouses. Again, that getting that conversation going and creating that safe space. Anything to add, Kay?
No, that's really articulate, and that's really we continue to raise awareness of this important aspect of men's grief.
There is a question out there on memory books, and I think that's a great tool to help you process that too. My wife was a scrapbooker, and those are our most cherished possessions, the books she left behind. So our lives and my kids' lives are documented really well until she passed away, and now I have nothing. But I have now since got onto Shutterfly, and it's pretty easy to learn this, to upload pictures and customize this any way you want. The technology is there, and I highly would encourage that for anyone who feels that might help you. Don't be afraid of it. You can't mess it up. Just get out there and start building. Great idea, though.
All right, thanks, guys, and thanks for your questions and comments out there. I'd like to thank Kay and Joe, and most of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Know that you're not alone. And if you want more information on any of tonight's points, please email us or check out our website, nationalwidowers.org, and our brother site, mensgriefnetwork.org, where you'll also find many resources. And we invite you to join us on the fourth Wednesday of every month for our Zoom workshops at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as always, if you have suggestions for future workshops or any questions, drop us a line at nationalwidowers.org or email us at info@nationalwidowers.org. And also be sure to check out our brother site at mensgriefnetwork.org. I'm Ken Levy. Take good care of yourself, and wishing you peace and strength.
Okay, can I say one thing, Ken? Sorry, we got one question out there. It just came in. About someone who lost a partner for 29 years. How can I get through this? And I think we all understand it feels that way, that you're not going to. Time is a weird thing, and it's very warped when you're going through grief, but day by day, it's day by day is how you get through that. It's how you get through a lot of things that are tough in life. And I never thought I would get to where I am now. There were days I thought, nope, I can't do this, and you do. And find those things that, as we discussed, bring meaning and keep your memory alive. And if you had a partner that long and loved someone, you're luckier than a lot of people who never had that. So it will happen day by day. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in there, Ken.
I'm glad you did. Thanks, Joe. I think we are out of time, and if you want to continue the discussion, feel free to get in contact with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully at the next seminar in June on the fourth Wednesday. So good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.